Well, welcome everyone. Glad you're doing this. This is an experiment in our presbytery that we're offering to anybody who's interested. The idea of a kind of a lunchtime conversation around a topic that's relevant. So our topic is red and blue and purple congregations. How can we talk and listen after the election in ways that love our neighbors? It's a great and timely topic. So do we need to introduce panelists one more time now that we're official, Fiona?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay. So we have, hold on, I'm switching over to video here. So we have Forrest with us. Forrest, can you say hi to everybody?
Hello. I'm the Dean of Spiritual Life campus pastor at Whitworth University. Glad to be here.
Thanks for joining us, Forrest. We're glad you're going to be part of this. And we have Alyssa. Alyssa, can you say hi to everybody?
Hi, folks. I'm an associate pastor at Shadle Park Press. Hi, Shadle.
That's great. And then we have Fiona Watts, who's one of our consultants with the Missional Network.
Hello, everybody.
And then we have our other consultant, Michael Bender.
Hi, everyone.
And I think this will just kind of switch to whoever's talking at the most, kind of. So here's a little bit of where we're going today, everybody. This will be half an hour, so we'll honor your time. And we're going to ask our panelists to share here in a moment, and then be thinking of questions that you might want to ask via chat along the way. And you should see a chat feature on your screen, and everyone will see what your question is or your comment is. There's also, I see a raise hand feature. Fiona, do you know what that is? The raise hand?
Yeah, let's not complicate things. Let's just use the chat box.
Good. No raising hands.
No need to.
Yeah, so feel free to use that chat feature at any point, and then toward the end, I'll lead a little bit of a specific Q&A time. So if you're having a question you want to hold on to, you can wait till the end, or you can just ask it or make a comment along the way. And just so everybody knows, we are recording this, and we just want everybody to know that, because we might want to share this out to other people as well. So with that in mind, we're going to start with our panelists, Forrest and Alyssa. We're going to start with the two of you and ask you to share just for maybe a minute or two about how your conversations with people have been since the election. What are you experiencing, and what's that been like? What are you hearing? Themes, threads, story, whatever comes to mind, just a minute or two. Forrest, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So here, probably very similar to, I would think, we've had very strong reactions, right? And the day after the election, it was very interesting here on campus that there was kind of a feel of a lot of mourning. A lot of people were very sad, afraid. There was in the intercultural students there, they had a kind of wailing wall set up where students were writing, prayers and thoughts and frustrations, and a lot of students, especially students, minority students, were coming in there and sharing this together. So there's that going on. That's very strong reactions. But then at the same time, on that same day, at Wednesday, students were coming out with their Trump shirts and Trump hats on, and who had kind of been afraid to be verbally, supportive of Trump before. Now, and I'm hearing stories of on election night, as students are watching the election, hearing how all of a sudden people who no one knew were Trump supporters started coming out of the woodwork, and they kind of felt not ashamed or emboldened or able to share their opinions now. And so it became this very interesting and hard dynamic where some people are really afraid for their families, themselves, really sad, really shocked, dismayed that our country could elect a person who is so hateful and has such hateful rhetoric. And then other students and others who are content and feel like this is the best thing for our country and very relieved. And so that very, very, very strong polar opposites. And then I think what I've also noticed is that often people are only talking to people who pretty much share their same opinion. So this group is sad together, this group's excited together, but really hard to cross over. So the best experience that I've had here is one of our students organized a night called Jesus the Christ and Donald J. Trump. and it was the point. There was a conversation time where we would actually just talk together, not correcting each other or debating, but just trying to understand one another. And there were about 10 or 12 who came, but most importantly, there was 10 or 12 from very different perspectives. And it was really encouraging and helpful. And I could see how it was really helpful to hear these very, very conservative, more Republican-leaning folks explain why they feel content, and there's much more, the Hillary Clinton supporters who are saying why they were so upset or afraid, and having this discussion that was not angry or defensive, but instead trying to understand was beautiful. I wish more were there, but for those 10, I think we all left, and me included, we all left with a feeling of, okay, I'm starting to understand the humanity of a different perspective here. And it was a good move forward. So those are some things that I've seen here.
That sounds really hopeful, Forrest. Thank you. Yeah. Alyssa, same question to you. Can you tell us what your conversations have been like?
Yeah, I kind of talk a little bit about some of the conversations that I've had with folks, both before the election, but also after. I've had conversations with folks in our congregation before the election on either side, and been helping them process or just even listening to them. This is why I'm voting this way. This is why I'm voting the other way. And just really feeling even before the election that there was a lot of different perspectives that people are coming from. And then when the election hit, I've had even more conversations with folks. I can resonate with what Forrest is saying. A few different people just feeling overwhelmed. Like, how are we gonna do life after this together? How are we gonna be Christians in community after this together? And I really carry that question with me. I wonder, as a pastor, what is my role for helping people to process this? But two encouraging things come out to me. At Shadle, we have a Thanksgiving morning service, and we have for about 30 years. And it's a very casual Quaker-style service. And I was kind of wondering how that would go, because people sort of share freely at that service. But it was so encouraging because there was this theme that emerged within the service of God's faithfulness abiding through difficult times. And I felt like everybody in that room, and I don't know where they all stood politically, but I know there were some differences. Everyone in that room was really carrying that theme with them. And I found that to be encouraging. I think that's an important theme to carry with us during this time. And I like hearing Forrest talk about these intentional conversations, which I think are really important.
Thanks, Alyssa. Appreciate that. I'm going to hand things over to Michael and Fiona next.
Okay, I think one of the things that we'd like to do just quickly, there's Cheryl. Just quickly at this point is to just encourage those of you who are with us to look at the chat box. If you haven't got your chat box open, if you go down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see an option where it says chat, and there's a little bubble with 3 dots. If you click on that, you'll see the chat box show up to the right of all of our faces. And I think the first thing we wanted to do is just check in with those of you who are on today and just say, are the things that Alyssa and Forrest describing, are those things that you're experiencing as well, or are you experiencing other things that you'd just like to add to the conversation at this point? So feel free to type away. We will we'll watch the chat box and make sure that your thoughts are shared.
And if anybody has one here, are you on? Okay. I can't do the chat box and this.
Yeah, is there anybody sitting there at Shadle that wants to add something while we're seeing if anybody adds anything to the chat?
Any thoughts or similarities or differences from what Forrest or Alyssa?
I have I think that my natural bent, and I think maybe all of us, if we have a difference, we just don't talk about it with the other person because it wasn't going anywhere as far as before the election. And as a staff, we talked about how do we intentionally get together and go through this and still be respectful and love one another and that. But I think after the election, most people have just sort of faded away.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you talk about it, you probably talk about somebody who has as you do as far as policies.
A couple of
easier.
It is.
A couple of comments that have come up on the chat. One from Mark. My experience has been similar with cheers on Wednesday and with tears. Kevin Lynn says similar conversations with people on both sides, but they don't talk or listen to people who think differently very often. From Laura, my current church context is quite conservative with less diversity in opinion. I've found this to be a pastoral challenge since I find myself in the minority that was disappointed by the election results.
Can I speak to Laura's comment?
Sure.
One of the things that I've been experiencing is communicating with pastor friends sort of across the country, and having one particular friend who serves a very cohesive group of people. They all kind of think the same way. They're all very sad about the election results. And so she's able to just kind of focus in on that and be public about the church's frustration and all these things. And I have felt as a pastor here in Spokane and also at Shadle that we just can't necessarily do that because we serve people who are on both sides and it's not necessarily one cohesive group. So I don't know, I don't really have an answer for Laura, but I guess I'm saying I think it's a unique challenge maybe to some particular geographical areas where we do have to balance that. It's difficult.
Can I add something too?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I've been thinking through in this is how to separate out what things are not essential to the gospel and what are in relation to this. And it can be hard sometimes, but for me, as I've been thinking about what I say from up front in a mixed group, thinking, okay, the call to love our neighbor, the call to seek justice, although those are interpreted different ways, and how we love our neighbor better, how we do that. But there's some things I think are, at least from my perspective, non-negotiable in terms of racism. Racism is not okay. Sexism is not okay. Xenophobia is not okay. These are things that I think God is clear about, that it's not okay just to hate others because they're other. And to whether or not, without even saying that Trump, well, some of you did say that, but there are times he did say things that are clearly, or to make things like sexual assault seem okay. To be really clear about things that are just wrong, as Christians, we have to say, I'm going to be Christian before I'm going to be either Republican or Democrat. This is wrong. But then without just slipping into saying, well, this side or this candidate is wrong. And say there are different perspectives on how we love our neighbor best. And there's going to be more conservative, more kind of liberal ways of thinking about that or whatever. But in the midst of those different political approaches, there still is we have a God who sets a true north, a morality that we need to be lifting up as a church in the midst of that. That's something I've been wrestling with.
There's another comment here from April, and she just says, similar conversations on both sides. I've found that many people can see across both sides, but many are very stuck and unwilling to extend grace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like we've become a little bit stunted in our listening skills lately. And that's something that I would hope to be able to practice more myself and encourage other people to practice, is to really hear each other, hear where one another are coming from.
And, I wonder if that's a great segue, Alyssa, to having Fiona and Michael share a little bit in regard to some tools that we might want to try in our various contexts. Because I think most of us are coming from, as we call it, the purple congregations, where, unlike Laura's, where it's fairly homogeneous, many of us are coming from contexts that are very diverse in their perspectives.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking as Alyssa was talking about listening. we do a lot of work with a lot of conversations and a lot of congregations, sorry, and our conversations with them begin with listening, because I think you're right, Alyssa, that we need lots more practice with listening. And I think, it reminds me of a situation I was in a little while ago in this little old church on the banks of a river, and the people, it was, it's declining in numbers, but the people who are there are hopeful people and committed people. And we started them off doing some listening exercises with each other, and the feedback was fascinating. One thing that we hear over and over again is that listening well is really, really hard work. It's just really hard. But the other side of it, when I was talking with this group, and I've heard it other places too, is they also realize that hearing somebody else's story, like really hearing somebody else's story, is a great privilege. And they really felt honored to really listen to somebody else. And, I think part of it is that we're so programmed to listen in order to formulate a response, rather than listening just purely for the sake of hearing what the other person has to say.
Yeah, and I think what I would add to that is that, as Forrest mentioned, there's some confusion about which identity is primary, and there seems to be a lot of argument and discussion that you maybe wouldn't call discussion, that's between Republicans and Democrats who happen to be Christians, rather than Christians who happen to have different political views on certain things. And I think if we're going to try to articulate a Christian perspective and practice this from a Christian perspective, we've really got to embrace that Christian identity first. And that can mean a lot of different things. But one of the things it means is that we're not accepting binary categories that are forced on us from non-Christian perspectives. So, over and over again in Scripture, you see when people were trying to trap Jesus politically, they always presented him with binary categories, neither of which were a win. And I can't tell you how many people I talked to before the election who felt like neither of their choices was a win. And it really drove me to say, see what Jesus does when he's presented with lose-lose kinds of choices. He just refuses to accept the categories and says, I don't agree that those are the choices. Now, of course, you can only vote for one or the other person, or you can vote for a third party or whatever. But in conversations, we don't have to accept binary categories, and we can listen, as Fiona is suggesting, to people as people who are complex and have different reasons for the ways in which they see the world, to appreciate that as a third way, to say we really want to understand the image of God in people first as Christians, and then discuss our differences of political opinion, but really treat those things as secondary to our primary identity as followers of Christ is really critical. And I think it's what the world needs. It needs Christians to model, hey, we don't have to draw these lines and put everybody in boxes and demonize the other box in order to move forward. That's not our only way forward. So I think we have that chance as Christians to really do that.
There's a couple of pieces in the chat that I just wanted to hold up for a second. From Norman, I have talked with a number of people for whom this is an ongoing emotional experience of grief. This is not just a political issue, but an issue of good and evil. And then Kevin responds, Norman, I agree, and I'm not sure exactly why it's the case, but I feel it makes it more important for us not to just completely ignore or stay out of the conversation as pastors. And Mark saying, I agree, Kevin, on Wednesday we purposefully did not talk much about the election results. But we did start to bring up how to love one another in small groups, Bible study, Sunday school classes, and in sermons.
Yeah, I know for me, one of the things that has come out of this personally is that it has made me much more aware of my calling as a Christian first, but also as a pastor, and the need for me to be more intentional about how I pray for our country and for my congregants, but also about how I interact with people. And that's a really good thing, that I'm needing to think more intentionally about that.
I agree with Michael as well, and Alyssa, that when we think about our primary identity and think about a lot of people kind of not voting for, but voting against someone, and that all that's kind of reminding us that maybe an invitation to say, to be the church and to be the people of God. And maybe this could be a great opportunity for us, instead of feeling like the church is being co-opted with either party, saying, well, clearly neither party really fits the church. It's becoming more obvious that neither one, and instead the church needs to be the people of God, living in the light of Jesus in this world in a different way than regardless of party.
Absolutely.
In our congregation, we've experienced an interesting couple of worship environments the last couple of weeks after the election, where we spent the first week with a corporate lament, giving people the opportunity to express their emotions, which we knew was going to seem partisan before the election, just because we didn't know the results, and whoever lost was going to feel like we were biased towards them. But we tried to make it clear, hey, this was planned beforehand. And then we had a service of Thanksgiving after that. And by far and away, the emotion of having a space to express grief, which connects with what Norman said earlier about this being a really emotional process, was highly valued by people. But what I was happy about was we were looking towards Christian spiritual disciplines for our response, rather than taking to Facebook and beating the tar out of somebody on the other side as a way to deal with our emotional responses.
I wonder if you all can respond to how you see your role as a pastor during this time. Has it changed? Has it been the same? In other words, I think particularly in Presbyterian circles, many of us have had kind of a discipline of distancing ourselves from politics and not wanting that to enter the pulpit, unlike some of our brothers and sisters in some other traditions where the pulpit is fair game for political discourse and pretty direct support of individual candidates. So I'm wondering how you've seen your role lately as a pastor during this new kind of season of politics that we've been in. Has it changed? Has it remained the same? And I invite others to respond via chat or the panelists.
I'll give a brief response to just say, it became very clear to myself and some of the other pastors in our congregation that we couldn't take a neutral stance in the sense of everybody's going to vote and it's going to be ugly, but we're not going to say much about it, and we're just going to encourage people to vote. And so we took a more direct approach to say, how should we think about public action as Christians in the way of Jesus, and what should that public action be like? Which turned out to be, I think, a healthier conversation. But it was a shift of role from that kind of, we don't want to be partisan, to we still don't want to be partisan, but we don't want to ignore the political environment and the effect it's having on everybody's lives.
Mm-hmm. And let me read out some of the chats. From Mark Wheeler: to mimic Michael, helping people say and admitting myself, I don't know how to see God and the Christians who disagree with me, but the conversation is important. And then a chat from Eric Peterson, who serves a church. I see my role these days to help a congregation pay attention to the gaps that may start to widen with respect to the care and attention vulnerable and needy people may experience, and to step into and speak up in those gaps.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I feel my role is to help people understand that it's so important not to make assumptions about one another and about what's happening even in our own church. You know, because I've had people come up to me and just talk to me like it's obvious that I would vote a certain way, you know, and having to open up that conversation a little bit and say, you know, not all Christians are voting this way. And let's think about why. Let's go deeper. I think that's a really important step.
And then Norman says, do we as pastors have a prophetic role?
I think that's a suggestion, Norman, isn't it? Or is it a question?
And then Mark's, I chose to preach on the 6 great ends of the church this fall surrounding the election, and the great ends addressed and opened the issues deeply. Interesting. Those are the 6 great ends of the church. You can find those in your book of order for those of us who are Presbyterian. You know, I'm aware of the time that we said that this would go from 12 to 12:30. So as webinars work, you're certainly welcome to just leave the meeting at any time that you'd like. But I want to maybe wrap up with Michael and Fiona. Was there anything else that you had intended to share? I know we cut short your time a good bit.
No, I think that, you know, we wanted to create space for people to ask questions about this topic and to, you know, sort of make it an interactive kind of forum. So I would just say that if there's anybody else who's got questions that they want to throw into the mix, to do that for sure.
And Michael, anything?
No, I think a big part of this is maybe not as complicated as it could sound. It is the hard work of one-on-one reaching out to people who you might think don't see things the way you see them, and inviting them to really tell you what they think in a safe space without feeling like you have to rebut or correct them. If all of us did that with one person, we'd be in a different kind of conversation, I think.
I think one of the things that I've heard a number of times when people sort of enter into some really intentional listening work is the hardest thing is to not talk. Like to actually just listen and not talk.
And then Eric wrote, I just finished up a series in Jeremiah, and we found that his prophetic voice was remarkably relevant for these days. Most definitely.
I'm struck by April's comment up above about the people, this working class people in rural areas feeling desperate and believing Trump can rescue them, and wondering how to articulate the gospel message in that context. That mixed with what Mark said of the 6 great ends of the church, and Eric about Jeremiah, and thinking about how can we keep lifting up the goodness of the gospel, the goodness of Jesus, the truth of Scripture, and speaking into these situations for the vulnerable, including those maybe we wouldn't think as vulnerable, like the rural or the factory workers, or, you know, that those maybe aren't the first in our mind as the vulnerable, but maybe they are as well, as we think about how that Scripture applies to how the Scripture leads us to live as the church today.
Anyone else want to jump in on the chat? Okay. Well, I want to thank you guys all for being part of our experiment, our first webinar, and our attempt at trying to do this. Little rocky start, but that's okay. We'll do it again, I think. What we'd really love for you to do is, I believe that there's a survey. Fiona, is that available to all the participants?
Here it goes.
Okay, so there's a survey, quick poll. You know, just respond to it. And then also, if there, the question that we'd want you to write, which you can't put on the poll, is if there is a topic that would be of interest to you in the future, just go ahead and send me an email, and we will see about trying to get that coming up in a webinar in the near future. So thanks again. Again, this was just part of our attempt to live out our mission statement of unleashing, empowering, and equipping local congregations. And so I hope it's been helpful, and I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Cheryl. Thanks,
All right.
Mike.
Thanks, everybody.
Lois.
Great
Thanks
to be
all
with
of
you.
you. Bye-bye. Blessings. Looks like Steve is still on.